Welcome to the Flip Your Script podcast. I'm Christy Peel. Today's guest may have the most interesting profession I've ever heard about because let me tell you, she has some good stories. So good, she even wrote an acclaimed book about it. Dr. Amy Attas is a veterinarian to celebrity pets, but she flipped her script from what we think of as a traditional veterinary medicine to new clientele. Dr. Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
So you wrote this book, Pets in the City, which is some of the stories and the things you've experienced as a vet to celebrity pets. What made you say, you know what, traditional veterinary medicine, I'm going to put that on pause and I'm going to go out and kind of switch the business and flip the script? What was the catalyst?
So I actually had a flip your script moment. I was the kid who always wanted to be a veterinarian and nothing was going to stand in my way. I was going to do that. And I did it. And it's a great story and we'll go into some of the details later if you'd like. And I worked at an animal hospital on Park Avenue. It was a wonderful animal hospital. I was so happy there. And in that process, my boss kept saying to me, you know, I really enjoy having you here. You work so hard. You do all the nights and weekends, which he really appreciated. So he didn't have to be on call any longer. And in that process, what was happening is I was meeting a lot of the VIP clients. And then the next time when they scheduled an appointment, they would schedule an appointment with me. Well, I guess my boss had an ego that I wasn't really all that aware of, and he started to get a little bit nervous that all the significant clients were requesting Dr. Amy. In that process, I worked there for 4 years and 4 days, and that's pretty significant why I give you the exact amount of time. He had promised me that he was going to make me a partner in the practice. He began to discuss selling me the practice. So there were all these carrots being dangled in front of me for why I should continue to work there. But in that process, I never actually got a raise. I just got promises of all these things. On my 4th anniversary of working there, he said to me, I have made plans to take you to your favorite restaurant. How lovely. And during that evening, we're going to discuss a cash bonus and the future that we will have together. And at 5 o'clock that afternoon, he called me into his office and he said, you know, it is your 4-year anniversary. I thought we might have a review. And why don't you, Amy, go first? And I said, no, sir, why don't you go first? You've called the review. I hadn't really prepared anything, but I sort of felt a little bit uncomfortable that all of this was happening unexpectedly. And he said to me, I would like you to take all of your personal belongings and leave now and don't come back to the practice. And I said, I'm a little bit surprised. We had plans for this evening. And he said, I've decided that you don't have the kind of personality that I want to go forward with into the 90s. This was August 4th, 1992. I collected all of my belongings. I went downstairs and I picked up my beloved Bumper. He was a blind pug who I rescued, who was like the best teaching tool you can imagine, because when people learned that maybe their pet would have a forever disability, or we, needed to do a surgery that would maybe make them look a little bit different, I would bring out Bumper. They would meet him. He was adorable. And after they fell in love with him, I would explain that he was 100% blind. And it was sort of very helpful for people to understand you can have a perfect pet who isn't actually perfect. So I picked up Bumper, my stethoscope, my big pocketbook stuffed with everything, and I left. The next morning, 2 clients called me at home and said, I don't know what's going on. You are not at the animal hospital anymore. My pet is sick and I only want to see you. And without having a plan, because all of this happened just 12 hours before, I made 2 house calls that day. I did not have a business plan to think I was going to be a veterinary house call practitioner. But after those 2 house calls, something amazing happened. I realized my patients were so much calmer in their own homes. And I was enjoying the experience more than I had. And I really loved being a veterinarian. But this was just a little bit different. It was personal. It was like the old-fashioned doctor who comes to the house. So that was a Thursday. And on Friday, I made 4 house calls. And basically, I had a colleague who had worked for this Park Avenue practice along with me a few years before. So he said, come to my office, do whatever you need. And what I did at his office was fill a house call bag because I thought, I really like this. I would get to see the animals in a more comfortable environment. And I thought that I might be able to see healthier animals that way. Because once a cat goes in a cat carrier, goes into a taxi, which is how people get around in New York City to go to the vet, then sit in the waiting room with barking dogs. By the time the vet sees that cat, its blood pressure is sky high. Its heart rate is really up there. And in fact, many of these cats are fractious because they're terrified. I come to the house. They don't know I'm coming to the house. There's no cat carrier, taxi, barking dog. I come in. They hate me anyway because I look at them in all the places that I want to be looked at. I stick them with needles, I trim their nails, but they hate me a lot less than they hate the vet in the animal hospital. So the whole experience is better for everyone, better for the client, better for the patient, and truly better for the vet. So that's how I started the first part of flipping my script. My husband said to me, you know, I really think everything that you're coming home and telling me at the end of the day, that you're happier than you were before. And let's see how we can make this work. He said to me, I think what we're going to do is, first of all, hire you an assistant, and we're going to get you a driver. And I thought he was completely out of his mind. I had just started out. I only had a few clients. A driver was going to be an enormous expense. But what happened, because I actually listened and hired the driver, I wasn't standing out in the rain trying to hail a taxi. Hiring a driver made it easier for me to get around Manhattan, made it easier for me to fill my day with more house calls, and spending money to then create a better practice, it worked out so incredibly well. And the business has grown every single year for 32 years. So now the next aspect of flipping my script was I felt very strongly that the manner in which my position was terminated might make people think that I had done something wrong. And I had a reputation that I needed to protect. The jury trial, they found in my favor for both compensatory and punitive damages for what my prior boss had done to me. So if that wasn't good enough that I won, I got 2 phone calls in the next few weeks. One was from the jury forewoman who wanted to know if she could become my client. And the second was from the judge. So not only did I protect my reputation, not only did I get into veterinary textbooks and journals as a case where an employee won against an employer, I got clients out of doing this. I left that practice, but not because of anything I did wrong. And again, I continued to grow and grow and grow. Well, one of the people who really irked my former boss and accelerated the process of me getting fired from there was Joan Rivers. So Joan was a VIP client at the hospital. She had her little dog Spike, the Yorkshire Terrier, who performed with her in her act and traveled everywhere she went. And occasionally he would eat food that she was eating, like from famous New York steakhouses, and he would get a stomach upset. And that would typically happen on a Saturday night when, of course, I was covering on-call emergencies. After I had seen Joan Rivers and Spike on a number of occasions, when it came time for him to have his actual just routine exam for vaccines, she booked the appointment with me. He saw her in the waiting room and walked over and said, Miss Rivers, there's no reason for you to wait. I'm happy to see you now. And she said, no, it's okay. I'll wait for Dr. Amy. Witnesses tell me they literally saw steam coming out of his ears as he walked away. He was just, I think that was an example that I had been there for 4 years and many of his VIP clients had gotten very comfortable with me, and it would be best for him to push me out the door with no place to land, and then he could keep all his VIP clients. What he did was he accelerated all his VIP clients to come to me. Because what Joan Rivers, the woman who was famous for Can We Talk, did She called everybody on the Upper East Side and said, let me tell you about my favorite vet. And she was such an enormous booster to my practice. I continued to care for her pets until the point where she passed, and I continue to care for them now because that's how she left it, that she wanted me to continue with their care. Joan was the first of many celebrities. Many of the subsequent ones were introduced to me by her, but I don't want to give the misunderstanding. My practice is not exclusively celebrities. It's celebrities, it's billionaires, it's your average New Yorker, it's people who live in housing projects, it's elderly people, it's people who find it too difficult to go out to the animal hospital. It runs the gamut. And that's why I flipped my own script and wrote a book. Because I come home every day and I still do this and I say, you'll never believe what happened today. And Steve, my husband, would encourage me, just go in the other room. I don't know what we'll ever do with it, but write these stories down.
That's great. You said so much. I want to like pull apart some different pieces. So initially, for people that are listening, like, I don't get the lawsuit thing. Like, and I think it's important to say, again, I'm not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer, but if someone exits someone in a way that could disparage them and minimize their ability to get work in the future, then that is, problematic. So basically, if people would have thought that you did something wrong, that would limit your ability to keep working in your field. So he even he said, hey, you have 6 months and we're gonna exit after 6 months. That would have been a very different look than when someone is like, thanks so much, you're out. Because people assume, oh my goodness, what did she do? And if you're working with animals, the what did she do could be real. People make up stories, devastating.
So I think you're 100% right. Had he given me notice, it would have had a different appearance. And as a result, being summarily dismissed, our argument was this was libel per se. Like he didn't say or write anything, but it gave the appearance. And that's why I felt strongly that I had to protect my reputation.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. If someone's like, wait a minute, I don't get it. So that is like a distinction. But also, I love that when you went to start your business, it wasn't, I have a business plan. And let me back up, as an entrepreneur, people come to me with different questions about how I started my business. And there are some different paths. And I think one of the paths is you have a specific kind of degree, you have a specific kind of financing, you have a specific kind of business plan, you present it to someone and you're able to start a business. But then there's this other kind, which is how I started mine and you started yours, which is, I really love to do this. I don't have a fully thought out formed plan. I don't have anything on paper, but I'm going to figure it out and keep doing something that I love and we'll see where it goes. And then it, really surprised you where it ended up going. So I love that about your story, that it wasn't, hey, in 10 years, I'm going to do this. It was, hey, tomorrow I want to do this and I really like it. And one thing leads to another. And I love that Joan Rivers, and like for our Gen Z audience, Google her, like pause right now, Google her, look her up, because you're like, I don't know who that is. You might be more familiar with her daughter, but like look her up. And she was a force. And back in the day, she couldn't get on social media in 1992 or 1993 and say, hey, everyone. So I can just imagine her with her blonde hair and her loud voice calling people like, hey, we're going to help this woman. But I love that it's this woman helping woman launch this business, because you could have purchased billboards in Times Square that would not have had the impact of Joan Rivers calling a bunch of people in New York City and saying, hey, you need to take your pets to Dr. Amy.
No. Dr. Amy needs to come to you.
Yes, that's what I mean.
That was the key difference.
Yes.
Interestingly, I wish she were alive to be a guest on your show, because she was a woman who definitely flipped her script over and over again. I think that was part of the appeal. Like, she realized that I had potentially been damaged by a man for no reason, and she wanted to help. So forever indebted to her. But Joan was one of many. Like, I would get phone calls on Monday morning And people would say, I was at a dinner party on Saturday night and someone mentioned their pet and that they had a house called Veterinarian. Now, I know at that dinner party, they were not allowed to talk about their kids, but they could talk about their pets. And I got word of mouth referrals because 32 years ago, nobody was making house calls. It was such a novel idea. Since then, a lot of people are making house calls. I've personally trained many of them because I can't service every single pet in New York City. I work hard enough as it is. And I realized that this was a perfect opportunity for a lot of people. Some people dabble in house calls. I don't dabble in house calls. This is a real practice. It's not run out of my home. It's run out of an office with office administrators, a bunch of employees, computers, fax machines, etc. But some people, young women who've just had a family, maybe they want to do a smaller version of a house call practice. They've come around with me to see if they like it. Many of them say, I can't do this. I mean, I spend my day in a car. I get in first thing in the morning, I eat my breakfast and lunch in the car, and then it's basically run upstairs, do what you need to do, pack up, go down into the car. There is a driver who takes us to the next call. In between, I'm on the phone, I'm looking up lab results, I'm giving people their results. So it is nonstop in a way that I was never nonstop when I worked in an animal hospital. You always had a minute to sit down at your desk while the technician was cleaning up or setting up the next. We are actively engaged for what often is a 12-hour day. And then at the end of the day, there are still phone calls to return and medical records to write up. So not everybody who's come out and said, I think I want to do this, has wound up doing it. Some of them say, I think I'll stick in a regular animal hospital. For me, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I do love the fast pace, but I really love the personal nature of doing house calls.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier. It's like the old-fashioned doctor, and anyone who has watched Little House on the Prairie goes to Doc Baker, right? And that model is coming back, and you were doing it before anyone was doing it for pets. I think it's fascinating. And when someone from your team reached out to us and said, "Hey, we think Dr. Amy would be great on the podcast," and we looked it up, and someone on my team said, and they highlighted Billy Joel because I'm a big, big Billy Joel fan. And I know you can't talk like specifics, but he is on the list of people whose pets you've taken care of. Billy Joel, Cher, and then as you mentioned, lots of everyday people. Was it hard in your writing your book, like what you could include and what you couldn't include?
First of all, I I didn't say anything I believe that would make anyone uncomfortable, especially with my celebrity clients, someone like Billy Joel. He and I met when he was staying in a New York City hotel and his dog was sick. The concierge knew about my service, contacted me, and all I knew was that I was going to a VIP. When I knocked on the door and he answered it, I'm usually not like head turned by celebrities, but like you, I'm an enormous Billy Joel fan. And I had to just take all that energy and keep it inside until after I was out of earshot and I could be running around all excited. And it turns out that Billy Joel had a pug. And I've always had pugs. So not only do I have one of my favorite musicians, I have one of my favorite breeds of dog. So it was all in all a wonderful visit. I wound up seeing him twice during that time when he was in New York, and he was very happy. And when he came back to New York in the future, he had me come and examine his dog. Eventually, he moved to Manhattan, and I became the regular veterinarian. He has homes in other places. Whenever the dogs were sick, he would call me. So we established a very, very nice relationship, and there were a bunch of stories that I wanted to tell, both about his pets and about things that we did together, specifically some major things for the Wildlife Conservation Society to help in elephant conservation. So when I wrote the pieces on Billy Joel, I sent them to him. And I said, I'm writing a book. I've written, I've included you in the book. This is what I've written. Are you okay with it? And it came back, congratulations. I hope the book does very well. And then when the book was ready to be published, he actually blurbed the back of the book. So it was with his permission and love that he's included in the book. Not one of the celebrities objected to anything I wrote. I take that back. One did, and that was Paul McCartney. He objected to the fact that I only wrote about one of his dogs. But I explained to him that at the time I wrote the book, the other dog hadn't been born yet. So he would have to wait for the second book.
That's great. And it's interesting because celebrities can, and VIPs, and just anybody could have a lot of different folks take care of parts of their life. Like you can get food delivered, you can get vacations planned, you can have experts do all sorts of things. But when it comes to children, then pets are the furry version of children. You want to do it yourself. You want to have the conversation and the relationship yourself. So you have such a unique perspective into different people's lives that their favorite someone else might not have, because you see people at vulnerable times, sad times, happy times, scary times, when they're not celebrities. They're just people who have emotions and are worried or thrilled or whatever it might be. So that's a very different perspective on humanity. And the mask is off on anyone when their pet is sick or dying or whatever it might be.
So it's true for the celebrities, and as you say, it's true for everyone. I do have a unique insight into people's lives, into the bonds that they have with their pets. And I do see them at their most vulnerable. Again, another reason that I felt that I had stories to tell, because it's not just the celebrities, it's every one of us. And, being witness to that relationship, oftentimes from the animal's point of view, I'm there from their first to their final days. And in that span, which could be 15 years, I've watched the children of that family grow up. Many of them go off on their own, get married, have pets of their own, and they all come back again when it's time to say goodbye. That's a unique insight into people that I get because I'm brought in as a trusted caregiver for their pets. And I take that trust so incredibly seriously. I'm honored that people will do that. Every single time I take care of a sick pet, automatically my brain says, I know what this is like. I've had sick pets, and the empathy comes forward. And I've had senior veterinarians, when I worked at a major animal hospital in New York City, witness this and say to me, don't worry, with time you'll get over this. And I thought, if I ever get over this, I don't want to work in this field any longer. If I can't be empathetic to someone else's feelings when their pet is sick or they're saying goodbye, then I shouldn't be doing this. And I don't even think, it's not that it hasn't diminished. I think I've gotten more because the significance of animals in our lives, myself included, has just gotten greater.
And people in your industry and people who really love pets are it's a calling, because your heart gets broken like the owner's heart gets broken, because to love an animal, like to love a human, to love anything, means that it will end. And you're putting your heart out there, and it's painful, and you have a role to do. And I suspect part of your role isn't just caring for the animal, but it's caring for the people who love the animal.
And I think that's more so doing house calls,
Yes.
because people are freer to express themselves when they're not in an examination room and their pet isn't on a cold steel table. Sometimes when we say goodbye to pets, people ask me to do it in their bedrooms. And it's everybody's on the bed and they're saying to their pet exactly what I would say to my pet. And the hardest part for me is as the tears are coming out of my eyes, because you can't help yourself, I have to be able to see what I'm doing. So it is extremely emotional for us. But I believe it's better for the humans and it's much better for the pets not to leave the house on that last day. And so I share their grief with them.
Mm. Well, everyone who loves pets and has pets is currently weeping. So if you're trying to drive, I'm sorry. We'll turn the tide here into something a little bit more. You can dry your tears, and we'll stop the waterworks. Your book has been, you mentioned it, you talked about it, but it is one of these feel good books, and it is the kind of book that makes people smile. And certainly you said it makes people cry, but it has been mentioned. Washington Post listed it as one of the 5 feel-good books. Associated Press, New York Times. It has been celebrated. And how you're a veterinary doctor first and an author second. What's it like to be getting accolades in a field that you didn't really sign up for initially?
So I'm the most unlikely author because if I had a writing assignment, I would put it off till the last minute and I would stare at my computer and nothing would come on the page. But when it came to writing the book, it was just, I think I was bursting to tell this story. And it is truly a dream come true to have written it, to have it published by Putnam, to get the accolades that you mentioned, and then to get the readers' responses. So I thought initially that, oh, they would be interested in my book because I have a little story about Paul McCartney or Billy Joel or Cher or Joan Rivers. And people are reaching out and saying, my favorite part of the book was when you wrote about your childhood and your passion for becoming a veterinarian and what you had to go through in order to do that. And then some people are writing that they felt it was just inspirational, that I kept having all of these obstacles in my way. And because of my calling, my burning desire to do this, I just said, whatever it is, I'm going to get over it and do it. And when I've given talks, I graduated from Barnard College, and they asked me to come a number of years ago to speak to their graduating class. And I overheard some of the young women say, I can't believe we have a vet talking to us at graduation. What could we have in common with a veterinarian? But my speech had nothing to do with being a veterinarian. It had to do with you make your plans for life and you know where you want to get, but you don't know what that road is going to take you, how it's going to get you there. And you just have to look at each one of these obstacles and say, how badly do I want that end? And if the answer is, I want that more than anything, then you figure out how to do it. If the answer is, I'm not willing to put that much effort into it, then maybe that wasn't the goal you should have set. But I know that in my life, any goal that I had that burning desire for, I made it happen. And I made it happen by putting 100% of my energy into it. So at the end of that graduation speech at Barnard, many of the women came over and said, I was really inspired by your story. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. In addition to lovely animal tales that will make you laugh and cry, maybe even learn a few things about pet care, although it's not a how-to book, but I wanted to also express, do what you need to do and make it happen.
That's great. Such a great message. And we talked about it before we started recording, but I have always had pets. I can't imagine a life without pets. I currently have a dog and a cat, and yes, they get along. And if politicians got along as well as my dog and cat, we would have a much better world because they get along great. They're the best of friends. But I so appreciate you sharing your stories and writing the book and giving some people insight into your really unique profession and how you basically put a blue ocean strategy together in an industry that you disrupted in the 90s, and now it's more commonplace. So congratulations on your success. And as we wrap up the conversation, I'd like you to share a quote to shed a little bit of light on perhaps how you were able to flip your script and have done it, not just in an industry, but personally as well.
I'd like to quote my client, Paul McCartney, because like I just talked about my speech to the Barnard class, it's a long and winding road. And, you might know where you start, you know where you want to end, but you have no idea how life is going to take you there. And as long as you find positives along that road, as long as you find enough energy to keep on going, eventually you'll get there. And I really believe that because I have had a long and winding road, and it's taken me to the best place I could ever imagine. I've wanted to be a veterinarian since I could verbalize what I wanted to do with my life. And I am now doing this for decades, and it's better, it's more fulfilling than I ever would have thought it would have been. So I'm glad I took that long and winding road.
That's great. And for someone who might not have known the Paul McCartney quote in there, can you pull it out? Because not everyone, I think.
Sorry, you're right. Paul McCartney was one of the four members of the music group The Beatles from the 60s. And he wrote a beautiful song Please go ahead and Google it so you can hear it, called The Long and Winding Road. It has nothing to do with my path, but it's just the inspiration that if you do take the long and winding road, you might eventually get to the door you want to get to.
There it is. I didn't want Sir Paul McCartney to not have the buildup that he has earned and deserves. Again, back to our Gen Z listeners. If nothing else, folks, you have learned about some celebrities that you may not have known about before. And I've had Mike Del Giudice, Billy Joel's piano player and singer and backup singer, I guess, on the podcast before. I've had you on the podcast. Like, I'm getting closer and closer to Billy Joel. So one day, after seeing him 15 times in 5 states, I'm just going to, like, magically he will appear. But anyway, I keep getting closer. Thanks so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. And all the best to you, Dr. Amy.
Thank you so much. I had a wonderful time.
Well, I think this week's Flip Your Script Challenge is probably the simplest one I've ever given. If you have a pet, snuggle it. If you don't have a pet, go to a shelter. Consider rescuing a pet. Snuggle someone else's pet. But there is something magical about animals and what they do for us. So that's a very simple Flip Your Script assignment, because I know that snuggling a pet will flip your attitude. My hope is Dr. Amy's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.